Hello and welcome to Monocle on Culture. I'm Robert Bounds. On today's show, we will meet and speak to one of the greatest photographers alive, Dennis Morris, the maker of the defining images of Bob Marley and the Sex Pistols, of a changing London and a fascinating Jamaica. Dennis was born in Jamaica in 1960 and, as part of the Windrush generation, emigrated to Britain and was brought up in Dalston, northeast London, around the corner from a church with a youth programme and a kindly benefactor named Mr. Patterson, who lent the 8-year-old Dennis a camera. Well, it seems strange to say the rest is history so quickly, but a mix of talent, curiosity, precocity and serendipity saw to it that Dennis became one of the most admired photographers of society and specifically musicians of his generation. We're talking to him just after the opening of a major survey of his work at the Photographers Gallery in central London. Dennis began by telling me about his first impressions of his new home.
I can tell you it was quite a shock for me because I remember when the plane landed, I turned to my mother to ask her if we had arrived.
Yeah.
And as I spoke, steam came from my mouth, and I was like, because I actually thought I was on fire. I'd never experienced anything like that before. And the cold was also something that really kind of gripped me in that way.
So the huffy breath was not a fixture in the West Indies?
No,
indeed. Exactly. Well, welcome to paradise, Dennis.
Yeah.
Pretty soon you had a camera in your hands, but before that, you and your mum shared a room in a shared house with a curtain across from the kitchen to the bedroom.
Yeah, because that was the way that for a lot of us who came over, it was very difficult for us to find proper housing in that sense. So what you'd have in those days was like be one house. On each floor there may be 3 rooms, and on the landing there would be like a cooker and a bathroom and a toilet, and each room had a family. And so what we used to do was divide the room with a curtain. One side would be the bedroom, the other side would be the lounge as such. And that's how I grew up for a long period of, from when I first came over. But the thing about it more than anything else was that there was a lot of joy within the house, within the household, within the families, all the different families. It was a real joy there, and everyone looked after everybody in that way.
Yeah, and there was this joy. And I mean, we'll talk about some of the blues dances.
The blues dances.
It seemed kind of multiracial affairs as well. It seemed that was Dalston, Tower Hamlets, Hackney, those 3 boroughs.
Yeah.
I guess.
Well, the blues dances really was a way of, for instance, what happened was if any of the immigrants were able to buy a house.
Yeah.
How they would probably pay for the mortgage was they'd always keep the basement empty, and they'd have blues dances there with the sound system. And the sound system was very vital as well to the community because it was a way for us to know what was going on back in Jamaica through the music that was coming from Jamaica. And so the music was very important. The sound system was very important because after a hard day's week working, Friday, Saturday, everybody just let off steam, dance and listen to the music. And it was a great atmosphere because it was 50p entrance, 50p for a plate of curry goats.
Yeah.
And if you were able to drink, you get a bottle top of whiskey for 50p. But the vibe was just so electric. So it really was very cool.
That's amazing. Note to all builders of social housing these days: put a blues bar in the basement, guys. Right? Yeah. But that joking aside, that must have been an amazing. That was the glue. I mean, there was the music, as you said. That must have been such an important glue for communities and to stick people together and to have people to have a sense of identity in community.
Yeah, it was very, very much so. And also, it wasn't really just a black affair, a West Indian affair. It was anyone that was into music. If you were white and you loved the music, you were welcomed, in every shape or form. There was no sort of a blockage in any way. Everyone was welcome. And the vibe, as I said, was very, very cool. The sound system meant because each area, like in Hackney, every area had its own sort of sound system. So at Hackney, we had people like Count Shelley, Admiral Ken, Fat Man Hi-Fi, Chicken the Thunderstorm. And in Brixton, you had people like Coxon, etc. in that sense. And that's how it was, yeah.
And then these all come together at certain points, and I guess Notting Hill Carnival stuff to sound system battles and
sound system battles, exactly. And the carnival was the glorious crescendo of it all. Come bank holiday, and when we'd all gather from Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Bristol, we'll all come down to London, to Notting Hill Gate, Ladbroke Grove, and just take over.
It became massive.
Yeah.
I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day, but we want to know what it felt like, what your first camera was, what it first felt like, because you hit the ground running as a photographer.
I started...
what did Mad Dennis?
Mad Dennis. I was called Mad Dennis because basically, unlike my friends, I was never really into football or cricket or any sports or anything like that. I was just obsessed with the camera. And it really started for me at the age of 9. I was a choir boy in a church in Hackney, St Mark's Church, run by a very eccentric white vicar, Church of England, and he had this vision of all the choir boys wearing Eton suits as they wear in an Eton, but he couldn't afford it. So he put an ad in the Times and for looking for benefactor, and a man called Donald Patterson, who was an inventor and manufacturer of photographic equipment. He saw it, got in touch, and they got involved with the church. One of the things he did was he created a photographic club for the choir boys. At the age of 9 was when I saw the magical process of photography. And basically I wandered within the vicarage. There was the photo club, and I wandered one particular Thursday, which is when the day was on, and looked over the shoulder of one of the older boys. I saw him take a piece of paper out of a box, put it on the easel, switch on the light from the enlarger. Image appeared onto the paper, counted for a few seconds, switched the light off, took the paper, put it into a dish, rocked it, and then this image appeared. I was like, wow, magic.
What kind of magic is this?
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Patterson saw my enthusiasm and I suppose potential, and literally took me on his wings and took me to museums, galleries, gave me books to read, the whole shebang. And I was using later on I was using Leicas at a very early age, and Rolleiflex. He'd loaned me his cameras, and I just wanted to be a photographer. From that moment on, I just knew that was going to be my life, And
sounds great. I love that. You're sort of learning to play the piano on a Steinway almost.
Yeah,
some of that
And
and so what's very early on in the show, and this is on the top floor of the photographer's gallery, on the 5th floor. One of the first walls you come to are these amazing images, really big guiding images, where you set up literally a white sheet.
Yeah.
Is that in your front room in Dalston at your mum's house?
No, that was in the front room of the space that my mum and I, where we lived.
Yeah.
But what was funny was across the road from the house was a telephone box. And so I kind of basically came up with this idea, because obviously my parents couldn't afford to really help me buy films, etc. So I came up with this idea where I made these sort of self-made cards, handwritten cards, which I'd give out to people, which was the number of the telephone box across the road from the house. And every time it rang, I used to run downstairs, pick up the phone and say, Dennis Morris Studios. And then basically what I used to do is I'd push the furniture away in the room, stick up a white sheet, borrow a couple of lights from the photo club, and then complete strangers would come to the house, and have their pictures taken. And I had this reputation of being extremely good and very cheap.
Well, you're extremely good from the get-go. I've got the book in front of me. It's a beautiful, beautiful book that comes with the show. You mentioned a lot of the community spirit and the dances, but you mentioned sort of people living quite poor, but with a lot of kind of joy. There's also a lot of dignity.
Yeah.
I know that's kind of maybe an overused word, and I don't want to use it wrongly, but there's such people. There are great people running the sound systems. People coming, with their Sunday best on, as you might call it, right? It's a real window into a time, and it's very beautiful.
Well, it's a very Caribbean thing, if you look at any of the footage of West Indians arriving, they're all very well dressed.
Yeah.
The pork pie hat, the suits, mohair suits, etc., etc. And no matter what the conditions were, we always kept ourselves really together, very dignified in that sense. That's how we lived our life on a daily basis. It doesn't matter. And we always had this optimism, the spirit of like a better day, a better time will come.
Well, there was the promise, wasn't there, with the Windrush generation specifically, of it was kind of called slightly nauseatingly perhaps down the other end of history, but the mother country.
The mother country, yeah.
Wasn't it? And that was, how did it feel like that when you got here in the...
Well, there were stories of
I don't just mean that seeing your breath in the cold at Heathrow.
But, there's things like the streets are paved with gold, and things like that. When I came, I'm looking, where's the gold?
So we start off in this beautiful milieu. As I say, there's so many of these wonderful portraits. Now, we'll kind of come on to how you met Bob Marley and all the rest of it. But there are these wonderful pictures that I hadn't seen before when you go to Southall.
Southall, yeah.
There's a sort of crux picture, and I think it's a beautiful picture because I'm from the countryside, so I loved seeing Southall Horse Market and a big lad who looks a bit like a butcher's boy leading out this bucking sort of a young filly at the Southall. And then, of course, the next image we see is quite an Asian Southall, as it's very much is today. What was the itch that you were scratching with finding yourself there?
Basically, again, for me was from the teachings and the influence of Mr. Patterson, and also the influence of people like Cartier-Bresson, Don McCullin, etc. I literally used to just go out on adventures with my camera, looking and searching for images. And so at one point, I ended up on a train and then you're going that way up to Ealing Way, and then I came off at Southall, and when I came off the train, I was just completely blown away by the fact that here was this community which existed, which it was like, when you went there, it was like literally like you stepped into India. It was incredible.
Yeah.
Everything was Asian based. The cinema was Norman roof had taken off and the Indian roof was put on. Indian movies were played, and even if you went into a pub, the pubs are run by Indian landlords, and instead of crisps, you got poppadoms, stuff like that. Yeah. But again, what I found there again was this community which was very, very strong, very united. The vibe was also very similar to the West Indian community, but it was Asian, Sikh, and so it was very, very similar, and so the thread and the glue was there of the same in that way.
I think there's also another shared thing. I mean, there are wonderful photographs of a wedding, at least one wedding here. Yeah. There's also, and you see the old Sikh men with their beards and their turbans and stuff. And then you see a very smart little family of three, of school children, a boy and his two sisters. Yeah. And again, there's that dress. Everyone's dressed. Everyone came here with their best intentions, I think, and they thought that everyone here was going to be dressed like the Eton schoolboys, perhaps, But there is a lot of show, but it's very dignified show. Very dignified, I think, in here. These are beautiful.
I learned a lot as well. I learned things about the culture in terms like with the turbans, the colours of turbans has different meaning, different shapes, etc. The food was incredible. I mean, the whole thing, it was a real learning curve. And I say to a lot of people, one of the things I've learned is this, that if you really want to know people, touch people, you need to sort of at some point get into their world, if you see what I'm saying. If you keep everything at a distance, you'll never understand why people are the way they are. You need to communicate. You need to find out. And once you do that, then you realize that basically, hey, it's just a different culture, but at the same time, we're all in the same path.
Yeah. And there's a lovely picture. I've got it here. It's of a. You took this picture, Dennis, in 1974 in Southall. It's a Sikh pub landlord. I'm not sure it's the pub, which must be the ship, which you've got another picture of here with a chap with his pint outside. But I noticed the total rung up on the cash register is 37 pence. That was probably a pint of something. A pint of bitter in those days. So you really have documented how Britain's
changed. You've got a very, very keen eye.
I'd just love to see all the different bottles and everything that he's got behind his bar. I have my eye out for the poppadoms and stuff in there. Now, talking of kind of crux moments, you were taking these wonderful, wonderful, sharp-eyed, charming portraits of people, meaningful portraits of people. And then you heard that Bob Marley was coming on tour to the UK, to a British tour. How did you hear about that, and how did you get to be in the back of his tour bus?
Yeah, as I said, music was always very important to me, and the school I went to, we had a little radio station which we, would broadcast through the school.
Did you have a different? Were you on the radio, or were you always out?
Everyone, each class had a turn of being the DJ and whatever.
Did you have a different voice? Did you have a?
I never got.
Did you have a DJ moniker?
I didn't have a DJ. I never DJ'd or in that. But I was very aware of the music scene as such. And so I'd read that Bob was coming over to do his first tour of England. And the first gig was a club called the Speakeasy Club, which is not very far from here, Margaret Street.
That was a sort of 60s hotspot, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like what they call a watering hole for the Rod Stewarts,
yeah.
Mick Jaggers and whatever, of all the big rock stars. That's where they would hang out. And so basically that day of the first gig, I decided I wanted to meet him, so I didn't go to school that day. And so I went to the club. I was there by 10 o'clock in the morning. I didn't realise that bands don't do sound check or whatever at 10 o'clock in the morning. So I was waiting away till I think about 3, 4 o'clock he turned up. And as he walked up, I said, "Can I take your picture?" He said, "Yeah, man, come in." And so I went in with him, and as they were setting up and stuff, he was fascinated by me, and I was asking me what it's like to be a young black kid in England. And I was asking about Jamaica, so I had very little memory of Jamaica. And he really took to me and told me about the tour and asked me if I'd like to come along. And I said, yeah. So next morning I packed my bags if I'm doing sports, went to the hotel. And in those days, they were just in a transit van. And there's a very famous, one of my most iconic images. And he turned around and said, "You ready, Dennis?" And I said, "Yeah, click."
And that's one of the images that have pride of place in the.
It's one of my most iconic shots, yeah.
And it's absolutely amazing. People will know it. And it's him looking over the back of whatever it is, the comma van or the transit or whatever it is. Yeah. He's so handsome, and his face is so alive with music and charm. Right?
Yeah, Bob had an incredible smile. I call it like the Elvis smile. He had that kind of vibe about him. But what happened was, the tour was supposed to last for a few weeks. Within a few days,
what did your mum say?
Well,
did you phone her from Wolverhampton or somewhere and say, "I'm with Bob Marley in the waitlist"?
We didn't have a phone, so what I did was I phoned the vicar to say, "Can you tell my mum where I am?"
She couldn't be angry with the vicar, could she?
No. And so he passed on a message. And anyway, so that's how I got around that. And so anyway, one morning within a few days on the tour, they woke up and they wanted to play football. And they opened the curtain and it was snowing. And Peter Tosh and Bunny said, "Oh, what that?" I said, "Oh, snow. What do you mean snow?" I said, "Snow." And then Peter Tosh said, "It's a sign from Jah. We should leave Babylon. No." And I'm going, "No, it's only snow." And Bob was really adamant. Bob was saying, "No, we have to continue."
It's an omen. He was like, "No,
we have to continue. We have to deliver the message." But Peter and Bunny wouldn't have it. And so they left and went back to and so the tour collapsed. And I went home and where you been? I won't say what happened, because you can't do those things.
What happens on tour stays on tour, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I believe.
Yeah, but it was it was fantastic. I mean, a lot of those very iconic images of mine were taken from that early tour.
There are so many of these wonderful. I think these are in the West Indies, aren't they?
Those are in Jamaica.
These are in Jamaica.
Yeah,
these are ones of Bob playing tennis, table tennis. I think this is in a sports shop in Leeds because he liked to get a load of footballs and equipment and take it back to Kingston, right?
Yeah, he was a very generous man. Yeah. He'd buy how many footballs and kits and boots to take back to the kids in Trenchtown.
And there are these wonderful pictures of him at the Lyceum.
The Lyceum.
Which is, everyone will know these, but these were, I think, reproduced for Marley Live, weren't they? I mean, these are on a cover album.
That was on the cover of Live at the Lyceum.
Exodus Live or whatever.
Live at the Lyceum, yeah.
I mean, you were a kid at this point. So how old were you when you were with Bob?
I was in my last year at school. I was around sort of 17, 18.
So it's time to make a choice. Yeah. And there's obviously the choice had been made for you. But it sounds like you'd made that choice a long time before, didn't it?
The choice, for me, there was nothing else other than photography. That was it. When I was leaving school, my careers officer said to me, "So what do you want to do when you leave, Morris?" And I said, "I want to be a photographer." And he said, "Don't be silly, boy. There's no such thing as a black photographer."
Yeah.
And I said, No. I said, "Well, there's Gordon Parks. There's, and he said, "Well, never heard of these people." "Don't you want to work at Ford?" I said, "No, I want to be a photographer." You know? But luckily, Mr. Patterson was always there to sort of say, you really can do this in that way. Mm. It was tough for me because my parents weren't really into it, at all, because, coming from a West Indian community, family. You know, your job is to get a job to provide.
And a job is a safe thing. It's not a thing where you meet rock stars. And
you got to contribute to the family, so you know, to the household in that sense. And photography is is like no way. Yeah.
Hadn't she heard the phone for Dennis Morris Studio ringing when you were 8?
Yeah, but the thing is, you see, like the amount of money I was making was like, it was really pittance. Yeah. Really, it was just enough to buy some films and whatever. But what it did for me though was that's how I learned my craft. That's how I developed my techniques.
You described your time with Bob Marley through various years, and you knew him right up to when he died. You described your time with him as sittings. Yeah. And I wondered, looking at the work up until that point and then afterwards as well in the exhibition, Dennis, whether you did sittings, quote unquote, like you'd take, like a portrait painter would take, or whether you really, because you did a lot of street work. Was that done quickly? Was that done after a lot of conversation? Was it done while you were talking? What's the secret sauce?
It's a technique of reportage, which is basically like a study of human psyche, you know, in terms of Cartier-Bresson would just walk the streets looking for that moment. And so with Bob, literally would be, you know, none of the pictures I ever took of him were ever taken in a photo studio. They're all on the road, in a hotel room, in his house in Jamaica, whatever. And it was just us having a conversation, talking, etc., etc. And when I saw something, I would then pick the camera up and take a shot, sometimes 2-3 frames. That's all. And then put it down and just continue in that way. That's what he liked about me. I was never intrusive.
You weren't always there poking.
Yeah, I wasn't intrusive. I never used flash. You know, it was just kind of picking up the vibes. And he loved that about me because, and when he saw those images, he realized that I was able to capture what he wanted to portray. Because one of the unique things about Bob was he was one of the first West Indian reggae musicians who basically understood the power of imagery. He really understood that. And so when he saw those images of mine, he knew that I was able to capture what he wanted, what he was portraying, what he was projecting. And so that's why, and so our friendship and relationship and work just grew and grew in that sense. And he was very comfortable with me around at all times.
And this obviously pushed the door open for you to be doing lots of other work with other musicians. You went to Jamaica under the auspices of Richard Branson's reggae label, which I Frontline, of course, which was the Mighty Diamonds and people like that, Gladiators. And stuff.
I did all those,
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I love those groups, and then obviously with Chris Blackwell as well,
I worked at Chris
Island Records, which was Bob Marley. Yeah. So you were the art director. Island, right?
Yeah, and that came about realistically after doing all that work with Richard. And I did all the work with Public Image. Chris Blackwell contacted me and said he wanted to meet up with me, and then we met and we talked, and he told me he wanted me to be the art director of Island Records. And to be honest with you, I never really wanted to do it because I said to him, but you don't have anything on the label that really fascinates me that I like. And he said, well, that's part of the problem. You know, he wanted a complete change. So he said, well, what is there that you like out there? And I said, well, there's this guy called Linton Kwesi Johnson. And I said, there's another band called the Slits. He said, well, I've never heard of them. I said, they're going to be big. And he said, look, here's the deal. He said, I really wanted to be as the art director, but I wanted to be art director with an A&R capacity. You sign those 2 acts. You oversee it all. And so I said, okay, fine, great. So that's how I got in there. And so I oversaw all of Linton's work and the Slits. And then after that was Marian Faithfull. I did,
I actually didn't know you took that picture. It's one of my favourite albums, and it's such a beautiful
Great
picture
album.
of her shot in kind of almost, it looks, I'm going to use the word terminology here, I stand to be corrected, but it looks almost like a negative. I guess it's the lighting shot lit from above by a single bulb or something.
Single light, yeah.
With her cigarette.
Yeah. And again with Marian, it was a really funny story. Marian, basically when we met, Island had tried everyone. They tried Bailey, the Latigan, you name them, but no one got the shot. They knew they had a great album, and when I heard the tracks, I knew it was a great album. And I said I could really do this, and they said, well, after trying everyone, they said, okay, you have a shot. And so I booked the studio, and it was a studio in Notting Hill Gate. She and I set it all up. I just had one armchair and 2 lights, And then she came to the studio, and as she walked in, she said, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "Of course." She said, "Well, this would be the making of you." I said, I know. And so she put her thing down and said, "Well, I must have a drink." I said, "Okay, fine." So we left, went to a pub nearby in Notting Hill. And as we walked in, she said really loudly, "I'm not some cheap hooker, It's going to cost you £200. So the guy behind the bar went, "You all right, mate? You all right?" And so we had a few gin and tonics, and then she said, "I must eat something." So I said, "Fine." So we left, went to an Italian restaurant, ordered tons of food, didn't eat anything, just overturned the table, total chaos. I said, "Okay, no." I said, "Don't worry, I'll pay." So I paid for everything. We went back to the studio, and then she went into the change room, came out glowing. I knew what went on. And then we started. The way I work, I would say if I was an actor, you'd call me a method actor. Yeah. Now, with Marion, she loves to drink, another thing, but I just really got into the drinking with her. And there was this moment she was on the floor, and it was like a blow-up moment. I was standing over her, and then and then she just said, make love to me now." I said, "Not yet. And then she got up, went to the chair, and that was a shot. Yeah. One frame. And I knew it from the moment I knew I had the shot. I knew I had the cover. And so next day, went into Ireland. Wow, we got it! Yeah! And as you know,
it's amazing. It's such a great shot. I didn't know any of that around them.
Yeah,
because I think they've just reissued this album. It's like a 45th anniversary, it must be, of it.
Yeah.
And that story is not part of its recent deluxe version, I have to say.
Yeah.
So thanks for saying that. It sounds like you put the work in to get that picture, though, Dennis.
Yeah, but
you put the miles in.
All the pictures that you see and all the bands I've worked with, everybody, it's always been some sort of way to get to that point. That's how I work, basically, in that way. As I said, if I was an actor, you'd call me a method actor. So anything from, like, for instance, with Southall, I spent, before I really started taking pictures, I spent days just going there just to be seen. Who's that? That kind of thing. And then somebody would come over and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I explained to them, "Oh, okay, well, you should maybe do this, whatever." And then, just built up this confidence, trust between the people, local people. And the same thing with the bands I've worked with. It's knowing exactly what they're about, and then building up this friendship and this knowledge, and for them to, because what I'm always trying to do, I'm trying to take the mask away to show the real person, the real inner self, and by doing that, then you get something more special. So that shot of Marion is really like Marion, because if you knew Marion, she always had a cigarette. She's a very flamboyant lady, a wonderful woman, an incredible person. And Bob was exactly the same. Bob was a real live wire, always on him, jumping around, always moving around, always had something to say, and that's how I work.
Yeah, lively up yourself.
Lively up yourself.
It's a beautiful little section of 4 or 5 photographs.
Yeah,
by which I mean to push people in the direction of it, because it's a masterclass. We can't go, obviously, without talking about the Sex Pistols and your work with John Lydon and Public Image as well, and groups up until now. But a lot of people don't make the link between punk and reggae, and a lot of the respect that was at least coming from the Sex Pistols and the Clash and bands like this toward black music and West Indian music particularly. That was obviously something you were aware of because you knew Bob and you knew the groups and you were in that world. How did those sort of two wires sort of spark up for you?
Yeah, basically, I always say it's a bit like like yin and yang. They really were meant to be together in some sense, because basically when punk started, in that sense, the music that was around at the time in terms of rock music, punks weren't into it because it wasn't saying anything, and the only other music that was really saying anything was reggae. And that's why punks gravitated towards reggae, because it was, socially conscious, saying something. And also what you have to realise is this, that Marley, Bob, he represented the new generation of youth in Jamaica. Punk represented the new generations of English kids in England. I grew up in England, born in Jamaica, grew up in England. So I had the best of both worlds in that sense. So for me, it was easy in some ways, if I'm saying. I didn't see any problem with it. And so when the two came together, it created this huge explosion. I mean, it was probably one of the most magnificent period for reggae music and also for rock music as well, because everybody gained something up from each other in that sense. You see what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. You had a foot in both camps.
Yeah.
They both probably dug you and your work, and you working with either, not side, but either genre or whatever.
Yeah, and I was an English kid, and Bob always used to call me there, look at Dennis, the English boy.
And working with the Pistols and Pill and stuff, obviously you had kind of natural born people who were brilliant on stage, brilliant in front of a camera, presumably as well, as much as they might have played not wanting to be stars. They obviously wanted to be. It helped that they were banned and that everything, all their notoriety.
It was, chaos. Again, for me, when with the punk movement, as one of the things that people don't maybe realize is this: I never really set out to be a rock photographer. My ambition was to be a war photographer, and so I was too young for Vietnam or anything like that. So when I got involved with Bob and the Sex Pistols, in particular with the Sex Pistols, it was really quite dangerous, at the time, because they were anti-royalists, etc. And so there was a lot of pressure on them and a lot of violence around it. And one of the things I used to do at the gigs, because sometimes at the gigs, I used to wear like a parka with a hood. And that was to protect myself from spitting, because that's the way that the fans show their appreciation of the band, by spitting at them. And so to get the shots, I had to be right in the front row with the fans. And so basically, to get the shots, I had to be pogoing with the fans, because if I try to keep still, the shots would be blurred. So there I was, a hood, spit, moving around. And that's how I got the shots, and that came again from that thing about reportage of war photography. You have to, if you're a war photographer, to get the pictures, you have to be in the front line. And to be in the front line, you have to get the respect of the troops to be there in that sense. So you're one part of it. And it was the same for me with the punk movement. They never saw me as being black or whatever it may be. You're just one of us. You're part of it. You're there. Let's do this. And so that's how it was.
Well, I always think photographers ask the best questions, because they have to kind of go behind enemy lines sometimes, right? It's a very interesting idea, or become part of life in another part of the world. Like you going to Southall when you were super young and kind of just being seen around. I think it's super interesting. Yeah. And then you've been shooting. One of the last shots in your book, I'm looking at it now, is Goldie in '98. How did you keep the vibe? You're obviously in demand. There's Oasis are in here, Stone Roses, amazing groups that are having a resurgence at the moment, or a work similar to theirs is. How did you keep pogoing at the front, Dennis, and not getting a blurry picture?
Sheer love. I love the music. I love the band. I love the movement. I've been at the forefront of every single genre of movement music that there is up to now, as such. And it's just a matter of I really have a real joy for the whole concept of music and of art in that way. And it's my life. Hence the title of the book, Music and Life. That's what it's all about. And the two are knitted together. Music and life. In that way, because music is part of your life in that sense. But the key thing about every single one of these bands I've worked with, they are very important to a lot of people within their life as such. They're not just like one-hit wonders, Goldie, the whole drum and bass movement was huge. The Sex Pistols was a massive movement. Bob Marley, again, you name it, Marianne Faithfull, it's all, they're all very, very important acts, singers who are very important to people's lives, in that way.
Yeah, they kind of get to a deeper truth, like your pictures of them.
Yeah, and you can, a lot of people can say, well, they can remember what they were doing when the Sex Pistols happened, or they can, people have told me stories like, for instance, the Lyceum gig that Bob played, how it changed their lives. I give an example. There was one person I met years later who was an accountant, and he said that he'd left university. He knew he wanted to be an accountant, and he went to see Bob at the Lyceum, and he said when he saw Bob at the Lyceum, he said he knew exactly what kind of an accountant he wanted to be, and he's a creative accountant, if you see what I'm saying, in that way. He just, you know what I mean, in that way. A lot of people have said that. Even Agnes B, the fashion designer, she said to me that she was there at Paris when he played his first gig in Paris, and she said it was so mind-blowing. She wanted to be a designer, and she said when she saw him, she just knew, I can do this, you know. And that's what Bob did for a lot of people. He made people believe in themselves, like he made me believe in myself, that I had the ability to do what I wanted to do. And he made people worldwide really believe in themselves. Because that was his message, you know, self-belief, regardless of the obstacles. Keep pushing, keep moving forward, believe in yourself. There's a better day.
Well, there's no better place to end it. Dennis Morris, thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
That was the photographer Dennis Morris. And Dennis Morris, Music and Life, is on until the 28th of September at the Photographers Gallery, and really is one of the best shows in London this summer. And the accompanying book is excellent too. Monocle on Culture is produced by Sophie Monaghan-Coombs and Steph Chungu, and Steph also edits the show. We'll be back at the same time next week, but until then, from me, Robert Bounds, thank you for tuning in.
What does culture say about the way we live and how we could live better? Join Monocle in Barcelona this September for our annual Quality of Life conference. From bold new voices in media, design and the arts to lively debates on diplomacy, design and urbanism, it's 3 days of fresh thinking and creative exchange. Find out more and book your seat at monocle.com/conference.